for this afternoon's session, we put the question, beyond 2030, what skills will we need for work in the social economy? So beyond 2030, we wanted to start kind of looking to the future. I guess we put that together before Elon Musk told us that we won't have jobs or need to work. But anyway, we'll go with it until that day dawns. We will still need those skills. Throughout the day so far, I think we've been looking very much at the day-to-day needs, the urgent, the what's right in front of us, how can we identify what those current needs are, how can we try and find solutions together, whether that's in funding or visibility or skills indeed as well. But I guess what's really clear to all of us, I'm sure, in the room is that the world of work is changing at a dizzying rate. And I think we can all feel a bit discombobulated at the moment with how things have already shifted in the last few years and are continuing to do so. And it's very much the same within the social economy. I guess as social economy organisations, we have this sense as well of being maybe time poor, resource constrained as well, and that obviously gives a context in which all of that change is even more difficult to navigate. And then that beyond that context within the organisation, we're all very familiar with the fact that we're now in an era of multiple challenges, this poly crisis as it's being called, from climate to housing to migration to demographic changes. And of course, the social economy, the community and voluntary sector, as we would call it here, is on the front line with this. And I've heard it referred to recently as a predicament that we're in, really, rather than a problem, because a problem implies that there's going to be a solution, whereas a predicament is something we have to live with, and we're going to have to learn a new way of living. So the social economy organisations that are here in the room, that are part of our sector, they're the ones on the front line. They're dealing with all these issues already, and it's only going to get more complex. And we've heard already today, the statistics. Ivan spoke to them, and a number of the panellists have also referred to different elements that kind of give us a sense of the scale of what we're talking about here. It's 170,000 people employed. It's 300,000 volunteers. It's 1 in every 3 people delivering public services in Ireland works in our sector. There's 1 in 8 of the workforce working in those roles. What skills are those people going to need, and how can we unlock the potential? And that's what it's about here. It's about potential for I suppose, making those empowering those people with the skills they need in order to fulfil the missions. So we've got a really great panel here today with us. 3 doctors, in fact. I don't know what the collective noun for a doctor is, but maybe it's a panel. And I'm really excited to kind of hear what they are going to, the perspectives they're going to bring, because we have 3 very different perspectives on the question. And I'm going to introduce them individually first. They're going to speak for a few minutes about their perspective on this question of what are the skills that the sector is going to be needing beyond 2030. And I'll introduce them individually as they speak. So first up, we have Dr. Tracey Monson, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Daughters of Charity, Child and Family Services. And Tracey has a wide and varied academic practice and leadership background in the areas of working with children, young people and families in need, from early intervention to protective services. And I guess she's bringing her expertise and experience of her work in the sector to bear on this question. So with that, Tracey, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Mairead. Can you hear me? Yeah? Great. It's great to be here, so just thanks a million for the invitation, and it's been so enriching to hear everything that's been said earlier on from the panellists, and also just the conversations in the room. So it's been hugely valuable, and it actually makes a change to be here talking about skills rather than talking about the F word, which is funding, because I don't think we can have a conversation about skills unless we talk about funding. And part of that relates hugely to the sustainability of the sector, but the value, the recognition of the value of the sector. And I suppose what concerns me a bit is that while we can talk a lot about skills and future needs, there isn't going to be a sector if we don't get the funding and we don't get sustainability in terms of the actual place that the sector is entitled to take, as one that delivers high quality services. So I think it's important just to state that in the context. Having said all of that, if we do get that recognition and we are, I suppose, looking to the future, I think what's really interesting is the landscape. So I think it's been mentioned earlier on in terms of things like geopolitical instability, the green agenda, sustainability, digital literacy. I was just having a look at the Deloitte CEO survey yesterday. They do it every 6 months. And the 3 critical things are labour shortage. So we know that's something that we're all experiencing across the sector, across the world. Geopolitical instability, possible financial, issues, and AI. So generative AI, how are we going to use that? How are we going to position ourselves into the future? So I think those are the areas that we would certainly see as spaces that we need to upskill ourselves in. I think the other critical area is, I think in the sector we appeal a lot to people's intrinsic motivation. So purpose, values, making a difference, having an impact, but you can't actually harness that until people's basic pay hygiene conditions are actually addressed. So I think we need to focus on people actually having a value, people feeling valued, organisations being able to look at things like skills audits, which I think have come out very clearly, and huge work being done in that, to identify what are the needs that we as organisations need to address into the future. We know COVID is an issue, we know mental health are issues, we know, wars, all of those things. All of these future needs mean we need new skills. So there's something about us having to, I suppose, really project into the future to be agile, as we all were during COVID, to figure out what do we need to train people on and how do we access that training. I think what's been so invaluable during COVID has been how the sector has stepped up, how we have all worked together in a partnership way, not just within the sector, but with colleagues in the state, colleagues in private enterprise as well. And I think that's waned now. I think we've kind of gone back a little bit into our boxes and we need to get back out. And I think that's how we get that cross-fertilisation of skills. Sharing, learning, being able to, I suppose, train each other, access training opportunities. I think that's invaluable. And I think even in terms of how we think of recruiting people, because that's one of the things that we're all struggling with, looking at a narrow lens of qualification base really limits things. We need to think about skills, and the discussion has all been about skills, the soft skills, the tacit knowledge stuff, as well as the hard skills. That requires a change in mindset. It requires leadership. So there's something about us having to train leaders as well and making sure that people are leading out on that. I think those are critical things. But I think a sustainable, skill-based sector must be underpinned by an acknowledgement of the value of the sector. And that has to be adequately funded. We can't keep trying to, make savings from bits and pieces to try and put people into training programs. It needs to be valued and it needs to be resourced.
Thanks, Tracey. Well said. We're going to move on now to Dr. Ciarán Dunne, who is the first Transversal Skills Director at Dublin City University, which is a unique role in higher education internationally. And his focus is on empowering students and graduates to thrive in an increasingly unscripted world through the development, application and evidencing of a variety of key transversal skills, which is something we've heard come up already today a number of times. So really interested to hear, Ciarán, what your perspective is, coming somewhat from the outside of the sector, I suppose, and kind of looking in.
Thanks very much, Mairead. Thank you for having me here. And as you were saying, at some level I'm kind of coming from the outside and I'm looking at all the amazing work and effort that's put into this sector, so it's really important to acknowledge that. I think in many ways, academics, we occupy a very privileged place in society but we need to take responsibility for that privilege as well, so it's brilliant to be here. And yeah, as Mairead said, my job title, Transversal Skills Director, is an unusual job title. Before I went for the job, I never heard the word transversal skills before in my life. But actually, I suppose my entry point would be at some level, touching on what Robert was saying earlier on around the issue around terminology. So first of all, even the term skills arguably is too narrow, too instrumentalist for really what's required particularly in the social economy. It's much broader. It's around a mindset. It's attitudes. It is knowledge. But we're at a stage now, really, in the world where we have to move beyond knowledge. That isn't to devalue knowledge. Knowledge is still a prerequisite, but it isn't a final destination. I think when we look at the world and we look at the myriad challenges, predicaments, problems that we face, we come to realize that in the vast majority of cases, these challenges or problems or predicaments do not emerge from a lack of knowledge. There is knowledge. They actually are based in a lack of what I might call transversal skills. Other people might call them transferable skills, human skills, para skills, meta skills, horizontal skills. I don't really mind what we call them. The one thing I am allergic to is the term soft skills. And I don't mean that in a really captious, academic, hair-splitting way. I really don't, because I've been doing this job for 2.5 years, and I spent months and months and months trying to wrestle with the terminology. But the term soft skills emerged from the US military after the Second World War, and had a really bizarre definition referring to basically skills that related to people and paperwork. That was it. But interestingly enough, the US military in 1972 themselves held a conference on soft skills and determined that the term shouldn't be used anymore. But the reason I'm saying I don't really care about what the US military thinks about it that much, but what I do think is the term soft is associated with negative connotations. It's a devaluing, a mislabeling of these skills. Because I said, if we look around the world, the problems stem from a lack of critical thinking, a lack of sustainability literacy, a lack of intercultural competence, a lack of leadership, a lack of futures literacy, a lack of creative thinking. These are the absolute vital skills that we need, and not just in the future, but now. So that terminology piece is really important, and it speaks, I think, at some level to the challenge of the social economy sector, because if you look, let's say, the difference between social sciences and the hard STEM, one of the fundamental differences is that in STEM they agree on stuff. Yeah, they have definitions. No one disagrees with the periodic table. No one disagrees what atoms are. Whereas in the social sciences, we wrestle with these terms. And that wrestling can be really rich, and it can be really fruitful, and it's important. But if we're trying to communicate with people, if we're trying to engage people, if we're trying to secure funding, if we're trying to lobby government for investment, it's important that there is a congruence and a coherence to the language that is used. Because if we as a group can't articulate that in a really compelling and clear and concise and cogent fashion, how can we expect other people to get on board with it? So I think that's a really important point to make. Now, as regards skills, when we talk about future skills, or we call them competencies or capabilities, whatever we want to call them, they are fundamentally human in nature, and they are agentic. They're about personal agency, and I think in many ways the social economy stems from this desire to foster people's personal agency, so that they have the ability to thrive. And my definition of thriving is that an individual has the ability to imagine, to pursue, and to realize a life that they have reason to value and that is of value to their society. That's my understanding of thriving. And so we need to ensure that the people working in this sector, because it's such a challenging sector, and again, I think the points Tracey was making was so important. I mean, a lot of people somehow have this kind of, they look down on people working in the social economy. I mean, people working in the social economy have such limited resources. They're under real-time pressures. They don't have the luxuries that a lot of other industry sectors have, and yet at some level they are not. There are many levels they're not valued. And I think that has to be challenged, and it has to be reframed in a really meaningful way. And I think if there is coherence amongst the sector, that can really help things. Obviously, like, I spend a lot of time looking at lists of future skills. So OECD, the World Economic Forum, all the different organizations, private organizations, whatever, you can go on all day long. They'll all list skills. And broadly speaking, they're the same types of skills. What I would say is absolutely fundamentally crucial is that within an organization, there is clarity about what you mean these skills to mean. So my definition of creative thinking may be different to Tracey's definition of creative thinking, and that's okay once it's defensible. But it's really important that if we're having a dialogue, and in my organization, if I say we need to be creative or we need to be ethical decision making, what that actually looks like to us, so it's visible, that it's written on the walls, that it's a very, very high level of clarity about what we mean, even if it's different to Eoin's definition of it. That's a crucial thing. I think particularly AI literacy obviously is an emerging transversal skill. Like 10 years ago, the term AI literacy wouldn't really have existed. My job in DCU is to identify skills that all students should have, no matter what program they're studying, and figure out how we define those skills, how we operationalize them, how we integrate them into programs, how we evaluate them, assess them, and crucially, how we evidence them. And so I have a list of 17 skills. That's quite an unfortunate, people don't like 17 for whatever reason. And perhaps I was a bit too ambitious when I came up with those skills. But the point is, it could be 10, it could be 20. It doesn't really matter that much once we're clear about exactly what they mean, and we can justify them and we invest in them. And I think in the skills session earlier on, there was discussion around, and even the broader panel discussion earlier on, there's such untapped potential to connect the social economy with higher education. Myself and Emer actually got me involved in social entrepreneurship about 10 years ago, and we work a lot in DCU to try and foster those connections. But it is at the tip of the iceberg. Why aren't there programs, undergraduate programs, full-time programs on social economics and innovation? Why don't they exist? Why isn't there more connectivity in the same way there is with private industry all the time in higher education? So I think that's a challenge to us in higher education, but it's also a challenge to the social economy sector as well. So I think emerging skills, certainly AI literacy is a key one. And then if we look at the environment within which these skills are being demanded, so complexity, the world is increasingly complex, so we need more collaboration, more teamwork, more critical thinking. We also want, in many ways, I think people working in the social economy are responding to a problem, a predicament. But we also need to develop higher levels of agency to imagine desirable futures. So one of our skills is futures literacy, which is UNESCO have an office on futures literacy. It's a really interesting area, and I'd encourage you to look into it. But for the moment, I think they're my main messages.
Thanks, Ciarán. Very interesting. Lots of food for thought there. I see Tracey making a few notes, so I'll probably come back to you on that. And finally, we're going to hand to Dr. Eoin Byrne. And Eoin is the training manager at Grow Remote. Some of you may be familiar with the organisation. They're an Irish social enterprise, and they're on a mission to harness the potential of remote work to drive community development and economic regeneration. Before joining Grow Remote, Eoin was a researcher and a lecturer in Irish Studies at the University of Galway. And I think today he's going to give us some insights into what he's seeing in terms of trends around technology, around the change in the workforce and the workplace. Over to you, Eoin.
Thanks very much, Mairead. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. It's all good. Brilliant. To go back to Ciarán's point there about how academics can never agree on anything, my background was in literary and cultural studies, so we're well used to not agreeing on meanings. So to start off on that point, I might even say for the next few minutes, I might focus less on what skills look like, but maybe what the future of work itself is going to look like. Every day it seems we read the newspapers and there's something else about how AI is either going to create a dystopian future for every single one of us where there'll be no jobs left, or it will be a utopia where we've managed to harness technology to the point that none of us have to work and we can spend all day doing lovely things like painting and writing poems, which would be brilliant, to be perfectly honest. But I do think the whole question of skills and the future economy, it's always a chicken and egg kind of conversation. And I suppose for that reason then I'd like to maybe talk about how we work today, and some of the things that we're already doing might be a good way to predict the future of what we will be doing as work. in the next, it's hard to believe it's only 7 years away, 2030, but anyway. I think when every culture and society goes through a boom of mass technological progress, there's always a kind of mixture of anxiety and giddiness about what that's going to entail. Back in 1930, the economist John Maynard Keynes, given the advances he had seen in contemporary technology, he forecasted that by the year 2000, most people would only work 15 hours a week. And I suppose everyone here in the room will probably say that that's not the case. We're probably working more now than ever. So again, trying to predict the future it's a helpless task. But again, if we're trying to look into the future, some of the things we do today, and particularly in the context of the social economy, can help us get a sense of what is coming down the line. I think it's safe to say that in the last 3 years, and particularly since the beginning of the pandemic, we've witnessed one of the biggest shifts in how we work in centuries. If the 19th century brought in the Industrial Revolution and the advent of the factory, if the 20th century brought in the modern office space, the 21st century has brought in this idea of distributed employment, or what some of us call hybrid work, what some of us call remote work. But it's a huge shift, and I don't think we can understate that the recent adoption of flexibility and adaptability in our work and employment practices has huge consequences. People can now live and work where they want because of current technology. And I suppose particularly in the social enterprise sector, March 2020 came, no one knew I certainly didn't know what Zoom was. I was still teaching in university at the time and everything had to go online. But very quickly people adapted. And I think this movement towards remote work in the last few years has really underpinned that in terms of both how we work and what we do as work is really underpinned by the sense of flexibility. I think particularly, again, to go back to this idea of like a distributed workforce and remote employment, at Grow Remote we run courses for organizations, whether it's corporate, public sector or the social enterprise sector, to help people make that transition to hybrid or remote work. And what we find is there's a huge amount of short-term benefits for organizations. There's increased productivity for staff. There's increased retention of staff. There's more flexibility, so staff are more likely to stay there. But there's also kind of other long-term issues. And I think to go back to this conversation about skills and what the future economy is going to look like, the social enterprise sector in Ireland right now, there's been so many great conversations today about how nascent it really is, and we're in a certain degree in the early stages of it. But often when we're in the early stage of something, it's the best time to make changes. We ourselves at Grow Remote have worked with dozens of social enterprises in the ecosystem to help them move to remote and hybrid models in the past 2 years. And they've really seen the benefits of it to become a far more attractive organizations for people to work for. This is helping them attract better talent into their organizations. There's recent studies to suggest that most people would actually take a pay cut if they could have more flexible working arrangements. So again, there's a lot of things that social economy and social enterprises in that arena are doing right now that's really going to make them more attractive and future-proof them for the next 6 to 7 years. I think as well, particularly in the social economy, and I wrote it down, I think it was John mentioned earlier, is how so much of what we do is based on a kind of deficit demand. We're filling the gaps and plugs that the market or the state in certain examples can't fill. And I think that's only going to continue to increase. We constantly go back to AI, this idea of automation. There's so many challenges that are coming down the line, whether it's digital transformation, whether it's green transformation. And again, if we can be early adopters now of this new way of working, of putting things technology first, adaptability, flexibility, we can create exactly the kind of roles that we need down the line, and then have the skills from recent graduates like the work Ciarán's doing there in DCU to kind of go and fill them. So I suppose to sum up there, predicting the future is very difficult. But what we can do is look at so many of the good things that the social economy are already doing. And again, a lot of this has been a response to the COVID crisis and the pandemic. And to go back to Tracey's point about how, we might have gone back into our boxes in certain examples, but once we can kind of look forward and enact a lot of the changes that we brought in the last few years and continue to do them, that's how we make the social economy far more attractive for future workers and future work itself. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Eoin, and sorry for giving you all an impossible task, but I think you did a very good job of setting the scene for the conversation. And I'm going to open the floor in a few minutes as well, so if anyone has questions, we'll have a roving mic to help us to have a conversation here in the room. I suppose just to come back, and Tracey, I said I might ask you, I guess as a practitioner and the practitioner on the panel, do you have thoughts as you listen to Ciarán and Eoin? Are there things that make you feel hopeful or put questions in your mind, or how do you reflect on your own sense of the sector when you hear how they describe the future?
I think it's very refreshing, to be honest. I think as a practitioner and I suppose as a leader of an organisation, sometimes you're so stuck in that, it's hard to lift your head up. So I think it's been fantastic to hear what Eoin and Ciarán have had to say. I think what's resonated with me, especially in relation to what Eoin said around flexibility, being able to attract people into the workforce. I think absolutely. I think if we're thinking about skills that we then as leaders in organisations need, we need to be able to adapt how we support people in that space. So I think one of the things that we've certainly seen when people have come back, we weren't working remotely anyway, but for people who maybe are now coming back post-COVID into a more normalised workforce, is people might have been connected but not really connected. So there's something about us being able to tap into people's individual resilience, I don't like that word, but coping or capacity or capability to actually draw out from them what do they need. So what do we as organisations need to do and the sector to support people in that space? I think there's huge learning in that. So I think that's been very, very good to hear what Eoin has had to say there. And I take Ciarán's point hugely around the soft and hard skills and the transversal skills, which is a new term. I haven't heard it, I have to say. But again, it's about the kind of core elements of human skills. That's how I would see it in terms of what are the kind of human skills that people need to function in the world, in society, in the sector. And how can everybody be equipped, but how can we as organisations or the sector continue to harness that and develop that and grow that when people come into employment? So I think that's all been really interesting and encouraging.
Thanks, Tracey. Ciarán, I suppose you spend a lot of time, and I know DCU is very focused on this, engaging with employers right across multiple sectors. Are there things that you're hearing in other rooms with other sectors that, lessons or conversations or questions that we could bring in to this room here? Are there things that you're hearing others ask, or are the conversations very similar?
Well, one of the big conversations, particularly beyond, let's say, the big, the really big multinationals who have huge resources and huge HR departments and massive budgets to invest in internal, upskilling, is how to foster an authentic culture of lifelong learning in an organisation. And I think that's an even bigger challenge in the social economy, whereby there's an urgency in your work that doesn't always exist in other sectors, perhaps. But kind of fostering and architecting a culture of lifelong learning is a really important thing to do. I think in terms of making your organisation future capable and sustainable, that's really, really key. Ireland doesn't have a great history on having cultures of lifelong learning. The OECD did a big report on our national skills strategy review back in May. We come in around mid-table, around 13.5% of adults in Ireland are engaged in some sort of learning activity. In Sweden, it's about 37%. So there's a lot more, and people are hungry. I think one of the really advantages, I think, of the social economy is there's a lot of people get involved in it. There's values involved in it, beyond the purely financial reward. People are passionate about it, and I think that's something that needs to be leveraged, because increasingly graduates are changing career more often than ever before. So graduates are changing career on average, or they're expected to, this generation, on average 6 times during their working lives. That's not changing jobs. It means changing one sector to another sector to another sector. So we're actually moving away from being settlers to seekers. and increasingly they're looking for value, as in meaning, in their roles. And I think that's where the social economy really steps into the limelight to go, yeah, we can offer you a lot of value at that level. But equally, it speaks to what Tracey was talking about, that the idea that you get value out of your job as some sort of payoff for not getting financially compensated for the work you're doing, that's really flawed. That needs to be addressed at a major level, I think. A really strong theme is lifelong learning in a major way, and making work valuable for people so they want to stay, because there is that churn. And then you have, I think, the idea of cooperation and collaboration. And so I might be overstepping the mark here a bit, but my experience of interacting with some social enterprises is their passion is their greatest attribute, but it can also be a weakness. What I mean by that is I kind of see a myopia of passion, as in passion is leading to a blinkered focus on, they created their social enterprise, and I'm talking specifically about social enterprises, because they had some lived experience in their life, some deficit that need to be addressed that the government wasn't addressing, and so they're very focused on that. And I think what needs to happen is there needs to be this level of collaboration right across the sector, where people can pool resources, where maybe there could be parallel expert working groups across the sector, where one working group is saying, okay, we're going to focus on how we can leverage the affordances of AI for the social economy. Another one is, okay, our focus is on how we can tap into maximize the potential of partnerships with higher education in the social economy. And so that level of sharing, I think, would be incredibly valuable. And that kind of ideas for those working groups could go on and on and on. But I think that would be really, really useful for the sector.
Thanks, Ciarán. Eoin, I think you're involved a lot in training and development in your role in Grow Remote as well. Are you noticing any trends in that, in terms of the demand that's out there maybe among the workforce? And are there lessons for us? Are there things that, in our sector, how could we be appealing to the people who are maybe going out to acquire those new skills? Or what are you seeing from your position as the training manager in Grow Remote?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose for us in the last 3.5 years, we really are only kind of making the first steps along this journey towards kind of remote first or hybrid working conditions. And we do find that almost on a quarterly or half-year basis, like things are changing constantly, because things are very much in flux. So for example, in 2022, it's the end of restrictions. A lot of people return to the office. But then in 2023, in one of our courses that we run for job seekers or people looking for their first remote job, there's been a huge increase in it, because I think people probably went back to the commute and remembered how they don't like sitting in traffic for about an hour every morning. So what we're kind of seeing is that for individuals and employees, there's definitely a greater demand for more flexible working conditions, whether that's hybrid or whether it's remote first. Again, Nick Bloom in Stanford University has been doing a lot of research on remote work and distributed models of employment. And I think it's something, in America alone, 72% of employees would take a $10,000 pay cut to be allowed to work hybrid or flexible. So again, in terms of attracting talent, in terms of retaining staff, those more flexible models are certainly becoming far more prevalent. When it comes to employers then as well, what we're finding is it's the other side of it. They're in a very tight labour market, like currently in Ireland is technically full employment. It's very hard to attract talent, new talent, keep talent, especially if they find that there's a lot of people got used to remote during COVID. Some people didn't, of course, it doesn't work for everyone. But a lot of people did see the upsides to it and the advantages of it. So what we're finding from employers, it's that, a lot of them are increasingly seeing the benefits of it. They're also seeing the challenges of it. For example, like to do hybrid work really, really well is possibly the most difficult thing to do. It would be a lot easier to be fully remote or to be fully in the office. But what we are seeing in general, though, is that, to kind of go back to the points we've had about the skills that are coming up, if the future skills in an economy that's going to be dominated by AI and increased digitalization will be based on flexibility and adaptability, I think in general, both employees and employers are starting to move towards that almost subconsciously. Like they want to work in more flexible, adaptable environments. And again, if they can do that process correctly, operationally speaking, that's only going to help increase their skills now for the future. So that's definitely what we're finding.
Thanks, Eoin. I suppose to ask the floor, is there anyone with a question there? If you put your hand up, Perrine will bring a microphone to you. So does anybody, we have somebody here?
Hi, Mairead. A quick question, I suppose, really for Ciarán, and it's to try and flip it on its head. You're taking undergraduates, you're giving them skills like the AI literacy, the future literacy. How do we go to the dinosaurs of the practitioners who are sitting in on the day-to-day doing that and getting that knowledge into their head as well? Is there a way around that?
So you mean people, employees of organizations?
Yeah, already there and sitting.
So I think you come at it from two levels. So we're coming at it from, my job is how we can ensure that graduates who are emerging from the formal higher education system have developed these skills in so far as it's possible. And we need to be realistic as well that, you know, they need to have discipline expertise as well. But anyway, so we're investing heavily in that, and our graduates will graduate now with a personalized transversal skills profile that employers are screaming out for. Because employers increasingly don't actually care what qualification you have, or less so. They put a lot of stock on what skills they have, and yet university transcripts are ancient artifacts. They list the qualification and the modules, but they say nothing about the skills. So there's a massive disconnect, and what I'm trying to do, or we're trying to do, is bridge that. Then the second question is, okay, people who are already in those roles, and I think that's where the lifelong learning thing kicks in. And there is, I mean, the Revitalities project, I was at the launch of the government, or the micro-credentials project during the summer. So there is a definite push towards fostering this culture of lifelong learning. But it has to be done within the acknowledgement that time poverty is a really significant issue. So we ran a big conference back in September for industry leaders from different sectors, and we asked them what was the biggest barrier to lifelong learning. And some of these were from big multinationals. And I mean, we did a Menti, and it couldn't have been a bigger font on the screen. As time is an issue. And I think that's perhaps even more acute in the social economy and social enterprise sector. But it has to be addressed, and I do think this idea of sharing resources, of finding ways to collaborate, so we're minimizing as much as possible the amount of time we need to do something by benefiting from the expertise that has been amassed by the collective. And I think into the future, in terms of sustainability of the social economy, that will be really, really key. And I think if it is emerging, and I'm not even sure if the idea that it is emerging, I mean, social economies are, you know, social enterprises have been around for centuries probably. But if it is at this kind of more embryonic state, let's say, than other sectors, there's a fantastic, and Eoin was talking about, there's a fantastic opportunity to redesign this economy in a way that other economies don't work. And to do it really in a really innovative, disruptive way. And say, okay, our values are based on collectivism and collaboration, you know, and transparency, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no silver bullet, unfortunately. I think it's about tapping into the funding opportunities that are there. Margaret, I'm not sure if she's here now, but she gave a hugely interesting and you know, informative talk around all the different opportunities that are available just in her organization. So there is an education, ironically, an education piece to raise awareness amongst people that they may not know. There's free programs out there that they can tap into, and they can do it in their own time. But obviously we need to be realistic about how much time people have.
Thanks, Ciarán. And that's Margaret Corbett from the City of Dublin ETB, spoke earlier at the skills session. So that, yeah, your local ETB is one stop definitely to take as you're looking for those opportunities. Are there other questions on the floor? Anyone want to raise your hand? I have another couple if...
I guess I'm curious about the remote working and whether if there are challenges there. It's obviously you have people working, they're more at home, they're more in their communities. Are there opportunities there that the social economy can help meet in terms of, like, is there more potential there for people to be engaged in their communities? Is there ways that we can capitalize on that and help meet? Because my experience, like, working online, it's a bit disconnected and people are online all the time. We're quite focused on the digital economy. And if you go back to those really hard soft skills, and like if there's an opportunity and also if there's a challenge there in terms of how we engage with people, if they're potentially more disconnected or anyway.
Yeah,
Question for
brilliant.
anyone?
Thanks so much. So it's kind of two things on that, and I think it actually follows on quite nicely from the last point where, and I even hate the term now that I've said it twice, like the nascent social economy in Ireland. But the truth is that in that presentation earlier on the skills, it's that 92% of organisations in Ireland that employ people have less than 10 employees. And that's, if it's true for every other sector, it's going to be true for the social economy. And often when you're in a smaller, you have greater opportunity to experiment and to adapt early and to change and to try things. And to quote Beckett and the suite we were in earlier, try again, fail better. So I think for the social economy, to bring in what Ciarán said there about this like culture of, constant learning, to be ready to adapt and to change as the economy and as technology dictates it, like that culture of learning and development really should be something central to the mission statement and the operation plans of every social enterprise. To go to the point about the opportunities, I think, we find both anecdotally and from our own research at Grow Remote is that social enterprises really do benefit from more distributed modes of employment. So for example, if you're hiring from all over the island of Ireland, that's your talent pool for recruitment has been expanded exponentially in a way that if you were location-based, you're just not going to be able to have that. So if you need someone to come to Dublin every day and your best candidate is down in Galway or somewhere, that's not going to work. But remote might be able to solve that for you. Likewise, with the employees increasingly looking for more flexible modes of work, that can be a really good way to attract talent into the social economy. There's the cost-cutting measures. There's certain social enterprises that are fully remote. They don't have office space, which is often a significant cost for organizations. So there's another benefit there. But to your point of the challenges, like you absolutely are correct, for all the kind of benefits and advantages of remote work, that point of social isolation can be particularly challenging. And it can be particularly challenging, particularly for social enterprises that might have client-facing roles. So if you're not seeing your colleagues every day, the isolation can almost double. There's ways internally an organization can combat that with kind of intentional cultural shifts to make sure that people are checking in on each other. But also one thing we're trying to do at Grow Remote is to make sure that we combat that isolation by running connection and social events around the country. So again, we acknowledge that there's huge benefits to remote work as maybe a future model for work that is more equitable for individuals, organizations, and the planet, for example. But at the same time, there are challenges there, and we're trying to kind of mitigate against them through these social connection events. But to sum up, I think for social enterprises, to adopt that learning and development culture now, to be constantly evolving and changing and learning, I think that'd be the best thing to do ahead of 2030. So,
Thanks, Eoin. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands. Oh, someone here.
Not so much. Can you hear me?
No. Yeah, can you hear?
Yeah, maybe I'm not. Not so much a question as a comment around the remote working. But shouldn't we be thinking about hubs? If we're talking about the community, that's actually what we're talking about. If we're growing the community and we're developing community connections, rather than working at home in your garage or in your attic, it's that thinking outside the box and looking to see, there might be 10 organisations working in a hub. So you're having the interconnection, you're having the social connection, and you're adding to your local community as well. So if something is going on or something needs to happen, there's a voluntarism that can happen out of that as well. This is a comment on that.
Absolutely, and I think we have some of those groups are here in the room as well, some of those hubs, because a lot of them are actually in the social economy. I know a number of them are here in the room, and I think, yeah, it's an excellent point, and I know Grow Remote, I'm sure, are connected in with some of the connected hubs.
And thanks very much for that. And I suppose it's probably the one misconception I'm trying to battle every day in work is that when we say remote work, we don't mean working from home all the time. Like there's amazing hubs all over the country in small towns, small villages, and also in cities. And what we find is in a lot of these hubs, you have multiple organizations They could be for profit, they could be from different sectors, they could be social enterprises, and they're all working together, and there's that kind of cross fertilization, it's interdisciplinary, and people are getting to know each other. It's building communities, but also it's just to go back to kind of Tracey's point about how we need to be engaged more as an ecosystem. I think those hubs are a really good place to do a lot of that, so we can all share our resources and learnings.
Yeah, so I think Carmichael and Creative Spark are definitely in the room, so there might be some ideas there. Tracey, I just want to come back to you, and we're kind of closer to the end now, and I guess one thing I suppose I'm aware that not every service provider in the social economy can offer remote work or even hybrid work, because of the work that you do, and I'm sure Daughters of Charity are one of those organisations, so that may be something you might want to comment on. But I suppose one other thing then is, I'm glad Ciarán talked about lifelong learning. You know, we're very much, it's the big conversation among the policymakers, and trying to figure out how we can, you know, really inculcate that culture throughout the economy, and we need to figure out how we can do it in the social economy, and we have those other constraints. Who do you think needs to be in the conversation around lifelong learning and supporting people development within the sector? Is it board members, funders, support agencies? Who maybe needs to be there and to help with that?
Great. I might just talk about the first point you mentioned, because actually I was going to just comment on that around the remote working. So I think absolutely there's opportunities to look at it, and I think organisations have to look at it service by service very differently depending on what you deliver. So in our organisation, all our services are face-to-face frontline, so we can't offer remote. We have tried to offer counselling and therapy remotely, but it doesn't work. And families may be in positions of high risk. It's not safe to deliver services remotely. So I think there needs to also be, I think employers have to, we've had to think about it differently. We've had to see, okay, what can we offer people then, rather than just 3 days in the office and 2 days remotely. And actually what has come up, and people view it hugely as valuable, is training as currency, to use that term, because people have said that to us, that, you know, training opportunities, being able to tap into resources, being able to, we've done the Grow Remote training actually, which was absolutely fantastic. All of our senior managers did it, and our managers, about 2 years ago. So that was brilliant for people to understand what do they need to do to support people differently. Who needs to be in the conversation around lifelong learning? I think it comes back to employers taking responsibility for really understanding what your people's needs are, first and foremost. So I think understanding, firstly, I suppose, what skills you have. So who do you have in your organisation? What areas can you develop people into? Giving people opportunities to move around. So in our organisation, people can move across the different services and experience different services. They can access training in different ways. Supervising people, getting skills audits, getting training plans. So I think it starts with the employer. And then it's around tapping into things like, you know, third level education, the training board, ETB were fantastic, that presentation earlier. Boards supporting ongoing training and lifelong learning as well. And the feedback loop. So the constant feedback loop of keeping the eye on the horizon of what are the emerging needs, what do we need to be ahead of the curve on, and just not just the here and now, but the future focus piece.
Thanks a million, Tracey. And I think with that, we will wrap up our panel. I really want to thank Dr. Eoin Byrne, Dr. Tracey Monson, and Dr. Ciarán Dunne for joining us and for taking us through that future focus conversation. I think there's a challenge for all of us and for all our organisations in that, but hopefully we've maybe sowed a few seeds here today. And I just want to say as well that this is part of this wider work that we're doing in the Wheel, and we'd really like to hear from you if you have thoughts or ideas around skills, upskilling, or needs that aren't being met. So please do keep in touch with us after today. And I'm going to hand back to Emma now.
Thank you
We'll
very
vacate the
much.
stage.
Thank you, Mairead. A bit of a round of applause for our panel there.